deprivation. Thank you, my Lords.
Okay.
My Lords, it's a great pleasure to follow the noble Baroness Lady Ritchie of Downpatrick and to very much echo her concerns about the issue of poverty in Northern Ireland, which is hit particularly hard, but indeed poverty all around these islands. Now, it's very tempting to use this speech to tackle the utter inadequacy of the Spring Statement in dealing with that level of poverty, the sheer level of suffering in our society, so many people struggling to put food on a table, keep a roof over their head. But I'm going to try and be more focused on this particular bill and the details of it. But I think we do have to look at the context, and the common phrase, the hashtag on Twitter is cost of living crisis. And that tends to imply the word crisis, that this is something that's happened from COVID and as a result of the dreadful Russian aggression in the Ukraine that the noble lady the Minister referred to in her introduction. But this is a result of very long-term trends where we've seen food banks being a fast-growing part of our society, as so many people simply do not earn enough money to be able to meet the absolute basics of feeding themselves and their households. And this is not a one-off crisis. This is part of a long-term trend that's seen multinational companies not paying their taxes, that's seen rich people becoming richer and richer, and the general society just having a smaller and smaller share of the pie, even fewer and fewer of the crumbs for many people. But I do want to pick up one of the points the noble lady the Minister made in her introduction, referring to £83 billion of debt interest payments. I think it is worth highlighting, because I don't think it is really well understood, that the majority of extra spending during the COVID crisis has been paid for by us borrowing from ourselves, borrowing from the Bank of England. And indeed, 2/5 of total government debt we owe to ourselves is government borrowing from government. And 4/5 of government debt is actually owed to people and institutions within the UK. So when we're paying interest, we're actually putting money into the economy. And I think that's particularly important because we heard in the words of the noble lady the Minister, and we're hearing very broadly from most sections of the government, perhaps not all, that this is the excuse for a new kind of austerity, cutbacks in government spending, when we already have a government that's been sliced to the bone, unable to meet the basic needs of delivery, as we see all too often in this, on your Lordship's House, as promised reports, promised progress, promised bills, promised regulations are later and later and later. The government is hopelessly overstretched. When, of course, what we should be doing now, what we have to be doing now, is investing in the transition that we have to make to the low-carbon economy, the kind of just transition in our economy that requires significant amounts of government investment. Let's think about investment rather than labelling it all spending. But if we are going to talk about debt, I think it is worth noting that private sector debt in the UK is 2 to 3 times that of the level of government debt. And our finance sector remains the most exposed to crisis of any G7 nation. So why do we not talk more? Why does the government not talk more about the size of the financial sector and the risk that it presents to the security of us all, rather than focusing on its own borrowing as the debt issue? Now, the noble lady, the Minister, in introducing this, talked about a fairer, simpler tax system. But of course, what we have, rather like our Constitution, is an incredibly complicated tax code. You better be feeling strong if you want to pick it up. That's like our Constitution, the accretion of many centuries of historical accident, of an expedient fix here, a gesture to a vested interest there. And we've accumulated and accumulated this complication. And the change that we're bringing in today is a small change that's there in this incredibly complex system. And what we could be doing, an alternative way of what we could be doing today, would be to actually, instead of lifting the tax threshold, we could take away one of the complications. We could set a single rate of national insurance. Rather than earnings above £50,000 being charged at only 2% national insurance, it could be raised to 12% national insurance, which would, on its own, raise £11 billion. would simplify everything, would mean that we do not have the regressive system of national insurance that we do now. But the Green Party has a proposal for a much greater simplification. And this is something I'm not expecting an answer from the Noble Lady Minister today, but I do think I should draw it to the government's attention. Why not instead have a single unified income tax, which could raise, leaving things at the same levels as they are now, £24 billion, which would be a huge immediate injection into social care, for example, and mean that everyone's income, whatever the source, is paid at the same rate of tax, not penalising workers and ensuring that the generally well-off in society whose wealth and income comes from property and other interests, investments. Why not take the money fairly from across society, across all income? So that's my modest proposal that I've put before the Noble Lady the Minister. I do just want to finish with one direct question which was asked in the Commons and not answered there that I hope perhaps the Noble Lady may be able to answer now. It would appear, calculations suggest, that people who are in receipt of universal credit will not benefit as much from this change as those who are not, because of the 55% taper rate. So that question was asked in the Commons and not answered, and I hope the Noble Lady might be able to answer it today.
My Lords,